Change begins from within. As easy as it is to look outside of ourselves and want the world to change, the truth is, it never will if we remain the same. This podcast was created for changemakers like you who want more love and connection in your community. Today, you are going to hear stories that will inspire you and also challenge you to be the change. We are going to go deep, my friend. So take a deep breath and settle in. My name is Emilia Tamburini. Welcome to the Circle of Change. Hello, hello. Today in Circle, we are sitting with Joi Ross, the author of How to Break the Cycle of Temptation, Addiction, and Guilt from the Inside Out, a path to freedom, fulfillment, and purpose. Joi Ross is a business owner, best-selling author, communications consultant, and trainer. As the CEO of Joi Ross Consulting, her focus is on helping others to identify and tap into their spiritual power, achieving abundance and freedom, and identifying and removing limited beliefs and mindsets that too often hold us back from fulfilling the dreams and visions we were created to achieve. Joi also founded and remains the CEO of Apex Direct, a consulting firm focused on communications, training, and public outreach. No matter which hat she's wearing or which way she chooses to serve, Joi Ross is a burning torch and a thought leader who effortlessly and resiliently ignites the soul. This is so true, and you are going to experience that in our conversation. In this circle, we cover an inclusive way to frame addiction to make it actually quite enticing and palatable. She uncovers what is possible when we accept the invitation that our addictions provide us, how to build our ability to follow our intuition. She talks about the 3 core steps that shift us from temptation, addiction, and guilt to freedom. And she drops some inspiring and practical ways to be the change. Joi has such a positive way to speak about this challenging topic. And because of that, it's easy to shift your perspective and make you want to get curious about addictions or unhealthy patterns in your life. All of Joi's work embodies changing the world from within. And so I am delighted to bring you this conversation. Enjoy. Joi, welcome to the Circle of Change.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, you're so welcome. I am so delighted to have you here. We connected through a mutual coach, and I can so clearly remember the moment when I was introduced to you. You were invited to share, and when your square lit up and you started to speak, I thought, oh, yeah, I want to get to know this person. She is deep and beautiful and brave and so full of inspired possibility. That's really what I felt from you. And now we are here.
I love that. I love that. And I have to say, when I first heard your voice, listening to one of your podcasts, and I shared this with you, I just felt like, oh my gosh, this woman, like her voice, your voice just drew me in, and it was so warm and like a thick, warm comforter, like fresh baked cookies, just yummy and delicious. And I felt just that your energy was so positive and loving. And I got super excited. I'm like, oh, I hope that I get to meet her. So I'm so glad that we're here.
Me too. Me too. I love that delicious description. Thank you. Oh, great. So here we are. To get us settled in, I'm going to start us off with a poem, and then I'd love to, just throw some questions out there into Circle and have us explore.
Mm-hmm.
So this poem is called Recovery. And for those of you who are listening, and Joi yourself as well, feel free to just close your eyes if you want, or take a deep breath and get centered here in this space, in this present moment. So this is Recovery, and it's by initials KL. Don't feel disillusioned by where you are now. Your progress is good enough. It's meaningful. It's on time. Though everything may go unacknowledged, every silent step is movement in the right direction. When it feels as though everyone is going forward and you're being pulled back by your own demons or your past, remember that every moment in this journey will play its part in the greater narrative. What a beautiful story to share one day, written just by living your life. So, the question that I love to start with is a question that we know well, and that's, who are you? It's just a way for people to get to know you more, to explore outside of your bio. And yeah, I just invite you to share what you feel called to share. So, who are you, Joy?
I love that question. I am just going to say what comes up. I am grateful. I am a woman whose life has been transformed. I am a lover of God. I'm a lover of people. I am committed to excellence. I'm a perpetual learner. I'm highly curious. I'm fascinated with humans and our behavior and why we do the things that we do. I am passionate about so many things. I'm a business owner. I'm a youngest daughter to my earthly parents. I'm a daughter of God. I'm joy.
I love that. Oh, and I can relate to so many pieces in there, especially the curiosity about humans and how we are and why we do the things that we do, all those stories.
Yeah, fascinated with human behavior. I always have been for as far back as I can remember.
I want to know more about your work in the world and this book that you published. And the title, I just love it. It's How to Break the Cycle of Temptation, Addiction, and Guilt from the Inside Out, a pathway to freedom, fulfillment, and purpose. Yes. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. There's so much about this title that is intriguing. There's a lot packed in there. I'm curious about so much, including, well, the connection between temptation, addiction, and guilt. But this word addiction really sticks out for me. I think it's because that has played such a prominent role in my own life, in my family of origin, as well as my own curiosity and diving into that relationship myself in my life and making certain decisions around that. It's also a word in my experience that is triggering for a lot of people and can really shut down conversation or bring up judgments of ourselves or other people. And so I'm curious, based on what you know, your life experiences, and your wisdom, what does addiction mean to you?
I love that question. So for me, I've always been curious about addiction. And I should say I never initially set out to write a book on this topic or any other topic for that matter. So this book is the result of what I call a divine download or a series of divine downloads that I started receiving a couple years back, where I just felt like I started getting these instructions that I needed to share with the world, my personal journey and the revelation that I have gotten on what addiction is and sort of how we find ourselves in that situation or in as I also discuss in the book, in these sort of cycles or patterns of behavior that we really don't want to be doing, but we find ourselves doing them. And we can sometimes find ourselves feeling stuck and wondering everything from whose life am I living to how did I get here, or how is this happening to me? All of those questions were questions that I found myself asking at different periods in my life. And in my family, there is a lot of addiction. So I've had a lot of uncles, aunts, cousins who have struggled, and I always just was curious about it. But to me, I agree with you that that word addiction is one that can be triggering. It's one also that I think sometimes we either feel uncomfortable about when we hear it, or we can automatically mentally opt out and just say, oh, that doesn't apply to me, so I'm going to tune out. But what addiction is to me is it's a fruit. It is a consequence. It is a result of things that often are stirring on the inside, whether it's in our minds. So from a psychological perspective, it's connected to a way of thinking. It's connected to often emotions that are stirring around inside of us that then we respond to outwardly by, doing some behavior. And then that behavior gives us a temporary feeling of satisfaction, although that feeling is temporary and somewhat deceptive, but we like it. And so we go back and do that thing again, whatever it is. And it's not necessarily those quote unquote big addictions that people might think of, like drugs, alcohol, although it certainly includes that. But it can also include behaviors that become addictions, like cycles of bad or destructive relationships, or unhealthy relationships with food, or spending habits that begin to spin out of control. To me, it's that. It's a fruit. It's an external sort of sign and signal that something on a very deep level is happening within a person, and that addiction is the result of that. The addiction is never the thing.
Wow. I love the analogy of the fruit. I just have this picture in my head of a tree with this apple hanging there, which is the outward thing that we see, but that apple is attached to the tree. And then, of course, the trunk that goes into, and the roots that go into the earth. And so it really feels like it is an offering. It's an opportunity to get to uncover maybe the well, not only what's happening for us and why all these things are showing up, but to really uncover our true, authentic selves if we can see it in that way.
Mhm.
That just makes it so much more enticing and palatable for not to play off a pun there, but it does feel like that's an invitation to step in and get really curious if we notice these patterns in our lives.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much the tone and the context that I present in the book. It's really offering people another perspective on what addiction really is, the fact that most human beings, if we are in tune with ourselves, if we're honest with ourselves, that most of us have a tendency or a pull toward something or a series of things that can become addiction. So it's not this stigma, this something that happens to people when they're weak, right? Or when they're not strong enough or any of those things. It's something that evolves and starts on the inside, bubbles up, and expresses itself in the outside.
Yeah, I love that. For me, I can personally relate to certainly how I have used alcohol in the past and how that has served me. And then also, yeah, this pattern of unhealthy relationships, especially intimate partner, and how I show up in those relationships. So that really strikes a chord. And I think it will with the listener as well, like just really broadening this perspective of what addiction is and all the pieces and how it shows up. So I know your book gets into the pathway to freedom, but sometimes, well, no, for me, what I have learned is that it has been important for me to have the vision in mind before I step into the how to and the do it, because it's when the going gets tough or when I feel like I'm getting stuck, it's that vision that pulls me forward. And I think that relates to, my own personal development journey, my professional development journey, having hard conversations. It's the vision that keeps me going. And so I'm curious, what is possible for us if we embrace our addictions, if we embrace this way that you are conceptualizing addiction?
I love that question, and it sort of connects with something you touched on when you hit on the word identity or going inward. And what's possible, I believe, is that we awaken to a deeper understanding of who we are, who we really are on the inside as humans, because we're not what we do. We're not actions and behaviors. So I think, one thing that I'm hoping results from people reading the book is that it sparks something within them that causes them to get more curious about going on a journey to discover who they really are, who God created them to be, the possibility that there is something bigger than us, to expand our minds for those, depending on where you are in your spiritual beliefs, your spiritual journey. So for some, I'm hoping to just spark some curiosity that causes them to say, maybe there is something outside of us. Maybe there is a power greater than me that created me. Maybe there are things in me that I haven't even tapped into or discovered yet. And I'm hoping that it causes that deeper introspective look inward to say, who am I? Kind of like your first question, who are you? I think that's a question that is a beautiful one for us all to ask, because if we take that journey, we can discover some really awesome things in that we do have this power source on the inside that's capable of allowing us to overcome anything, that we are never victims, that we are never trapped forever, that we're never stuck forever, because we always have that power within us and our mission, if you will, right? Our quest, the challenge that we're presented with is to say yes to discovering that, to studying and learning about that. So I'm hoping that the book will do that it'll spark people to really want to discover their true identity, what that power is, how to tap into it. Because I believe, and my experience has been, once you take that journey and once you start it's a delicious journey, first of all. And once you start uncovering things, the more you begin to know as you pull back the layers, it's like the more you want to know. Like you, it's like, oh my gosh, there's such good stuff in there, and you just want to learn more and more. And I believe we could spend a lifetime on that journey and not even fully understand how powerful we are. But it's one worth taking. And it's also one that I am hoping will lead people to really uncover intuition. We all have experienced having that little, whatever you want to call it, gut feel or that little voice that sometimes wants to guide us in a certain direction. And sometimes we ignore that voice. It's like the more we shut it up and the more we quiet it, we can get to a point where we no longer hear it, not because it's not speaking, but because our ears have become dull. But I'm hoping that people will want to really get connected with that, because that will cause true transformation from the inside out. And it's a beautiful thing to discover. It's so empowering, and it's life changing. So I'm hoping that that's what comes out of it. I do talk in the book also about the power of mindset. That also is something that I think is universal. So, again, regardless of spiritual beliefs, spiritual practices, whether a person is spiritual at all, there's so much literature in science, psychology, also in spirituality, in multiple religions. I use that word and sort of do air quotes in my mind because I'm not big on religion. But there is definitely something to the power of our thoughts. And in addiction research in particular, there's heavy research that has shown, when looking at groups of people and those who are able to break free of cycles or patterns or addictive behaviors, and those who struggle, one of the key differences is having a growth mindset. So I introduced that concept, and I'm hoping that people will become curious to study the power of their own minds, to study, hey, what is a growth mindset? How do I develop that? And then just play around with it, like play with it, do your own tests and, hey, let me see if this works. So that's what I'm hoping.
That is a beautiful picture. And it feels, well, transformative comes to mind, not only for the specific issue at hand, but it just seems like once we step into this journey, everything will start to shift. Relationships, work opportunities, what we do in life, our self-perception, all of these things. There's a couple things that really struck me when you spoke. And the first one was the tapping into our intuition and really honing that relationship. That really sticks out for me because when I started my spiritual journey, my deepening of knowing myself, the question that came to me that instigated it was, how do I trust my intuition? Because I felt like I was flopping all over the place, and I sort of knew I had that gut feeling that you spoke of, but I continued to ignore it. And it was causing a lot of pain in my life and the life of others. And then what cropped up on Google, literally, that was the first breadcrumb. And I just started following those breadcrumbs, continuing to hone this ability to hear my intuition and follow it, which takes courage. It takes trust. It takes experience. It's a muscle, I think, that the more we work it out, the easier it gets and the more fun it gets. I love that you brought in that aspect of joy, and that this doesn't have to be a really treacherous, painful experience. It's both and. There's parts that are going to be painful, I think. And we can do that with joy and liberation.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you you touched on that. Like, how do you trust your intuition? Because I think there's a definite connection between discovering and testing. And I agree with you. It's almost like a muscle that has to be developed, right? And it can be fun. And it's been that for me. So I think that's why I describe it that way, because it does become fun to sort of just test it out and say, okay. And then like for me, I've started discovering that the more I just surrender, really is what it is. Surrender to that internal voice, that's not an easy thing to do because it requires getting out of your head. And especially for a person like me, who's really into analyzing everything and wanting to know, and I can go down a rabbit hole intellectually. So it does require training yourself, right? To sort of quiet your mind and let your intuitive voice be the loudest one and turn that volume up and turn all the other volumes down. But when we do that, and the more we test it out, what starts to happen is it does start to build our confidence. So I think there's a definite connection there as well, even in terms of like the whole pathway to freedom, fine tuning our ability to intuitively hear and trust that voice over time builds confidence in our ability to make decisions when we're in those triggering situations or those challenging situations that maybe in the past would have caused you to take a step back toward that destructive behavior. But once you're more in tune with your own voice and and you have greater confidence in how to navigate, it starts to become easier to make different choices in those situations. It makes it easier to say no to certain things, and it makes it easier to say yes to you and the vision that you have for your future. Yes to that person, like the true you, and no to that other you. So I think there's two versions of all of us, right? There's the real us, and then there's that other us that sometimes wants to just run off and do crazy things. It's like sometimes I find myself like, okay, ooh, she's trying to take over. I have to tell her to sit down and say yes to that other, the true me that I see, that's my future self, that me that I see, that's my real deep down on the inside self.
Yes, I love that. I feel like it's easy to get distracted and pulled away from our true selves. Like there's so many messages out there telling us how we should be, how we should show up, we should do. And I think that starts from a really young age. And as you're speaking, I keep thinking, well, it feels like the life journey is this uncovering of who we are. So you're curious about people and how we show up and why we show up. Where does that come from? At what point in life do we stop listening to our intuition? Have you thought about that in terms of why is that the case that we step so fully outside of this and then it seems like we use the rest of our life to find our way back?
That's such a yummy, yummy question. I love your questions. I have thought a lot about it, and I've spent a lot of time on my own. I spent a lot of time in therapy. I spent a lot of time more recently in rapid transformational therapy and hypnosis and deep meditation, like sort of regressing back, because I'm curious about all of that. And what the picture that I see is, I think when we're born, we come into the world a clean slate. We come into the world, first of all, really believing that there's abundance. because we come into the world saying, hey, I'm hungry, I'm going to cry. Oh, when I cry, somebody feeds me. When I do this, somebody cares for me. So we don't have any preconceived notions of lack. We don't have any preconceived notions that we're doing something wrong. And I think there are many things that come into play. Obviously, some have to do with our immediate environment and what's happening in our household. And I believe parents do the best that they can. But the reality is, because no human being is perfect, there's no such thing as parents even being capable of raising a child in a perfect or ideal environment. So some of it is, due to our parents' really lack of knowing that everything that they say affects us, due to their lack of knowing that everything in the environment that we're exposed to affects us, right? And then we go to school. When school starts, we're sort of groomed by society, really. So through all of those means, our immediate environment, school, and then as we get older, that circle broadens, right? So then it becomes those things plus our circle of friends, plus what we're exposed to in the media and all of society, especially in America, in the capitalistic, westernized culture that we're in. It's set up presenting these things that we should be. It's like, it kind of forces us in a certain track, right? Because that's society's way of making sense of everything, right? Because we actually do have the bandwidth mentally, but it would be exhausting for us to try to see and process each individual for who they really are. So then we want to put people in categories, and then we want to tell people, okay, here's your track. Okay, if you're a woman, then yeah, be concerned about your appearance, or you look a certain way, get an education, do this, do that. If you're a man, okay, so then go down this track. And I think all of those external expectations put us in a situation where our ears become sensitive to those external voices because of being told that what we were doing was wrong or bad. So like for me, being that little kid in school, where I would always come home with report cards that were generally good, but there were those comments. Oh, Joi talks too much. She talks too much in school, right? So those kind of things can make you start to turn down your own identity, sort of. Or I was highly curious, and thank God my parents saw that and they nurtured that. But there were certainly environments around other adults who were offended or irritated by my curiosity, right? And then over time, through our actions, we can start to dull that voice. So like for me, a big part of it was like the flip side of my curiosity, right? So like some of my things that became addictions started as simple curiosity. What would it be like if I tried that? I just like intellectually wanted to know. It wasn't, anything else. It was me like exploring, even though there was that little voice that said, hey, this, your parents told you that that's bad for you, or that that's probably not a good idea. It was a form of rebellion in a sense, right? It's like, and for me, being strongly independent, overriding that voice often was me exerting my freedom, my independence, that part of me that says, oh, nobody's going to tell me what to do. So I think it's probably different for each person. But again, we reach a point where we've done so much of that. We've overridden that voice so many times that it gets easier and easier to override it. But like I said, it's always there. So it's not like it stops talking. And that's why, to your point, I think it's so easy when we reach a certain point in adulthood that we can go back and rediscover that voice because it was always there. We just stopped listening.
Hmm. And would love to just launch from right where you ended there in terms of, okay, so now we've reached this point in our life where maybe there's an awakening. For a lot of people, I think it's this really painful moment that they experience and they're like, wait a second, I'm repeating a pattern, or I feel like there has to be something more to life than this. So many questions that crop up. And so, okay, we have that realization. Then what? What is our pathway to freedom, essentially?
I can answer that this way. And I explain this in the book because it is not my intent and it's not my desire to present myself to be anything other than what I am. So on this topic, I am not an expert necessarily. I'm not a behavioral scientist. I'm not a theologian or a spiritual guru, right? What I am is somebody who has experienced deep spiritual transformation. What I am is somebody who has been given a lot of downloads and revelation, things that I could never have known on my own that came from outside of me. And so, from all of those perspectives, I think that the pathway, if I had to like lay it out in a series of steps, I would say I would go back to step one is involves surrendering. There's a chapter in my book called Stop Trying to Stop. So I think that's definitely step one is surrendering, which requires a certain level of humility, a certain level of getting to a point where you understand that it's okay that certain things are just outside of your human ability. So surrender, number one. Number two would be to ask for help. For me, being a believer in God, what that looked like for me was praying, literally crying out when I was at the end of my rope, when I had done everything that I knew to do and it still wasn't working. I was still stuck. I was still, in these addictions, and I had many. So crying out and asking for help from a power greater than my own. And then really from there, being open to exploring spiritual identity. Because I think that's where, in that third step of taking that spiritual exploration, is where all those other things will begin to awaken within you, like the fact that the things that I said before, that you do have power, that there is this intuition, whatever you thought it was your whole life, that actually was more significant than you even knew. I think those things will begin to reveal themselves to us when we put ourselves in a position to receive the answers. So those are that's like the core. And then I think depending on where each person is, because we're all unique, each person's journey will begin to take form and take on a shape of its own that leads them to where they need to be and ultimately a place of freedom. But it certainly starts with those key steps. I firmly believe that.
I love the steps that you outlined. I feel that messaging resonates a lot with my own journey. And I just want to say that there might be a listener out there that is thinking, well, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, and there's a resistance to that. I can relate to that. I mean, I grew up, both my parents had very strong opinions about church and religion because of their own experiences. And so in that environment, I didn't have much respect for religion. And then growing up, my father, he was a very spiritual man, like deeply connected. But because of our tumultuous relationship, I really rejected his spirituality and used it. I thought he used that as an excuse for not showing up in my life. And yet still, I got to this point in my life where there was no other option but to ask for help, rely on something greater than myself. And that has shifted everything. It's shifted my perspective of my father's journey and of religion and of so many things. And it has allowed me to open up to this beauty in life and allowed me to do my healing work, which is a continuous journey, and explore the deep connection and empowerment that you speak of. I'm curious if you have any comments on that in terms of anybody that is listening right now that might just have some resistance to those first three steps because of their own life experiences with religion or spirituality.
I love that you asked me that because I absolutely do. I frame the book in the intro, sort of explaining, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that here, that although clearly, because of my own personal experience, transformative experience with God, I am a believer in Him. I do consider myself to be a Christian. At the same time, I've had my own personal journey, not too unsimilar to yours, where I grew up in a very sort of religious environment with my father being a pastor. And so I've always, I think, believed in God, but there were a lot of things about religion that never sat well with me on the inside, even as a little kid. And I couldn't explain it. I didn't understand it. I just knew that there were things that just seemed odd that I didn't really want any part of. And so my personal journey included going through a phase where I sort of said no to religion. I never really rejected God because I always remember hearing that little voice that I always associated with Him. But I definitely rejected religion and then went on my own path to discover spirituality. And that's where I am now. I embrace relationship with God. And what I would say to the people out there who maybe don't believe in God, or even people who consider themselves to be atheists, right? Or people who, there are a lot of people who have been hurt by religion, people who have been in church and been abused by people who were in positions of authority. So I would say to them that, first of all, you're loved and there's nothing wrong with you. And even though you may find yourself in circles where people would try to put on you something negative because you say, well, I don't know what I believe, or I'm not sure that I believe, it's okay. So that's what I would say to them. And I would invite them to just consider, and that's my only message really to everybody, is consider the possibility, investigate, explore for yourself, consider the possibility that perhaps there is a power outside of yourself. Perhaps there is a creator, and see for yourself. But I also, if I may, there's like a little excerpt in the book on this that I'll just share this couple paragraphs. This is I actually have a chapter called Believe in a Power Greater Than You. So belief, it's a small word, and it's also among the most powerful ones. Belief is key to accessing the power of miracles in your life, accessing the power of the Creator. We all believe in something, whether it's God or Jesus or something else. Even people who profess to be atheists believe in something. They believe that there is no God. People who commit suicide often believe that there's no point in living. People whose hearts have been broken time and time again sometimes start to believe that all men are cheaters or all women are gold diggers. It goes on and on. Humans are hardwired to believe. So if you're not a Christian, belief still works. The mind is the manufacturing center of life. What you think and believe on the inside will eventually manifest itself on the outside. What we believe affects our thoughts, our perceptions, and ultimately our life experiences and outcomes. So for people who are not quote unquote religious, or even people who are not quote unquote spiritual, I would present to them that even if those things are true about you, you are human, and therefore belief is something that applies to you. What you believe does affect how your life goes, what you draw to you, your behaviors and your actions. So I would appeal to those people in that way.
Yes, I believe that to be true. And I love how that when we just think about it as belief and how our beliefs impact us, that again, that's in our control. There's a real empowerment piece to your messaging in terms of how we go about this journey is really about us recognizing what our beliefs are and then choosing what do we decide to believe in. And that speaks to the mindset piece that you also delve into. This book is so delicious sounding and so life transformative. Where can people find this book? Where can people learn more about you and how to work with you if they're curious about that?
The book is available on Amazon. The easiest way to order the book is from my products page on my website. So it's Joi Ross, JOIROSS.com/products. So you'll find a link to order the book on that page. You'll also find some free materials on mindset. So I actually have a growth mindset guide. And then I think there are a couple of other pieces that we put up on the website that are all free for people to download on just making little micro mindset shifts. So that's all on joyross.com/products.
Fabulous. Thank you. In our last round, a mini round, this podcast is really about being the change. It's helping people to show up in a way that brings about the change that they want to see in the world, they want to see in their lives. And I have a certain opinion about what that means. And I think other people have other opinions. Some people, immediately think of Gandhi and the need to starve themselves and protest on a national level. That's one way. And there's so many other ways we can be the change. So I'm keen as we close out, what does being the change mean to you?
I'm discovering on this podcast and this interview that everything sort of in my life has the same sort of inside out flow to it. So for me, that means being intentional when I wake up every day on a very practical level, asking. I like to just put out there in the universe, what is my assignment today? How can I have a positive impact on the people that I'm going to come in contact with today? For me, it looks like just showing up in all of my comings and goings, all of my interactions with others, really trying to show up being the best version of myself and showing up with how can I give? What can I give? How can I be a blessing? And, clearly because I'm imperfect. It's not something that, where I hit the mark 100% of the time, but it sure is my goal. It sure is on my radar. It's that on a very practical level, as well as right now, me doing the things that I believe I've been instructed to do that are part of the reason why I'm on earth. So it includes sharing this book. I've got a couple other books that I've been instructed to write. So sharing that and just trying to be an encouragement to people in whatever form that takes, trying to be love, right? Because people need to see, what is love? What does that feel like? That's my way.
Love it. I'm so glad that we got to sit and have this conversation. You have been such a delight to have here in Circle. And I know that you have impacted at least one person. You've changed their life by sharing your story with us today. And I'm so grateful for that, because in a big way, that's what this podcast is all about. But also just thank you for your life path, for listening to your intuition, for listening to those calls and taking action on them, and being the change, making a difference in the world. So much gratitude to you, Joi.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful as well for the opportunity. It blesses my heart. I hope that if one person listens to this and it had a positive effect on them, then it's worth it to me.
I'm now passing the talking piece to you. If you feel called to put your voice in the circle, please head to humconsulting.ca/podcast and share your story there. I cannot wait to hear what has come up for you as you have listened to what has been shared here today. I wish you love and joy beyond your wildest imagination. Thank you so much for being here in the Circle of Change. I also want to express my gratitude to the following peeps. Circle of Change is recorded on Lekwungen territories, and I am so grateful to live on this land. Our opening and closing music was created by the talented E-Roll Beats. You can find his creations at erollbeats.com. And special thanks to my coach, Mary Chan of Organized Sound Productions, for bringing this podcast to life. Until next time, ciao.